Colleagues, thanks very much for coming along this morning. It must be the early start that's deterred a few others from coming this morning, but you're very welcome to this event on inclusive growth and actually how do we make it work. I think we all know that when the First Minister in an acceptance speech November 2014 talked about building a socially just Scotland, and a Scotland vigorous in its determination and resolution to tackle poverty, support business, promote growth and tackle inequality. And I think it was founded on participation, prosperity and fairness. I think for us we could obviously say this is a real third sector agenda. The Scottish Government is speaking our language on this agenda as well, but actually the reality is it's about an agenda for people, communities and businesses throughout Scotland. Because we know in the past our economy has probably not served the poorest in our society as well as it should. And we all know that all the evidence is there that inequality is a drag on the economy. You only have to read Martin Wolf over the last 2 years, see some of the evidence now from the World Bank, the IMF, and even some of the American banks are now getting it, that it is a drag on the economy. And actually, in terms of SCVO's point of view, we've actually seen less inequality equals a stronger economy. And we've argued that for the past couple of years. So I think the desire to change the economic and social comes from recognising this cost. And I think the Scottish Government has accepted if it doesn't make changes to its economic strategy, people will continue to live in poverty and the economy won't grow. So we've got a new economic strategy where a key part is around economic growth. So we've got a strategy that actually focuses on using the economy and the wealth it creates to tackle, which is frankly our endemic social health and income inequalities. And I think we know that that's the key point that we have to do. I think the interesting part is, at this stage, no one has all the answers on this. The Scottish Government have been very clear that they don't have all the answers, and they're going to have to work with the third sector, the private sector and the public sector to actually do something about it. So I think that presents an opportunity. The question for all of us is, how do we create a fair and prosperous Scotland, and what do we need to do to make it work? What practical measures could help achieve income, regional and social equality? And actually, but I think sometimes as well we've got to think the success of this strategy will not, as some people in the third sector might believe, simply be about, redistribution, which parties on the left might think is the one thing that's going to work here. It's about actually the right way to reshape our economy, to work for the many, not just for the few, and create opportunity for all. So it's combining competitiveness, or growth, whatever you want to call it, with fairness. And I think that's something that we're all committed to. So we're not naive enough, and I think in the third sector, I think anybody is, that in creating a socially just society which puts people at the heart of the economy is an easy task. We all know the changes that Scotland needs to make are going to take 2 generations. And I don't think we should kid ourselves, and I certainly don't think politicians in the Scottish Government should either, because actually this is a long-term agenda. And actually it's not just a Scottish thing. Once we're over the phony war in the American primaries, we'll see that inequality and jobs will become a key battleground in the American election as well. So I think, certainly for me, I want an economy that's a competitive Scottish economy, one that's obviously fair. And that brings us to this morning. So what are the issues we need to address in thinking about reshaping our economy? I think for SCVO, this will be one of the key grounds that we have over the next year. Our big 3 policy themes: society, which is around poverty and welfare; democracy, the participation agenda; and the economy still hold true for us because they're all interlinked. So I think this morning what we're trying to do is start a bit of a debate on how do we balance the competing interests of business, the economy, and tackling inequality, for example. 2 great speakers to kick off the debate. First of all, we have Jim McColl, OBE from Clyde Blowers Capital. Now, Clyde Blowers Capital is an independent industrial investment firm based in East Kilbride. Probably many of you know the name. And It's interesting looking at the website, which is a business that we values is described as the CBC way. And actually, those things I think are quite pertinent to this morning, because it's about market facing, think big, can-do attitude, global outlook, trust and empower, and networked. And actually, a lot of things that resonate, I think, for even an organisation like SCVO in terms of how we do things, or how we want to do things in the future. I mean, Jim himself left school at 16, took up an engineering apprenticeship at Weir Pumps, and later on in his career he bought a stake in Clyde Blowers. And over the last 5 years, many of you probably know the story, he's bought 68 major competitors. He's now got a 55% global market share in that original core business, and has since then bought, other companies, and including a company called Textron in a £1 billion deal. So I think works in 27 countries, 85 companies, employing 5,000 globally. So a very successful Scottish success story. And he's also a member of the Scottish Government's Council of Economic Advisors. So we're going to hear from Jim first. We'll hear from Henry Simmons after that, from Chief Executive Alzheimer's Scotland, and then we'll begin into a bit of a debate and a Q&A. Jim?
Thanks very much. I think I feel fairly well qualified to talk about inclusive growth this morning because my own background is that I did come from a fairly poor working class family. There were weeks where we didn't have, my mother had to borrow money off neighbours and so on. But I believe in the environment I was working in at the time, there was a lot more opportunity than there are for young people today. Social mobility, progress was easier than it is today for young people. I left school at 16 with 3 O-levels at the time, English, Maths and Arithmetic, and I went into a traditional engineering apprenticeship. So I worked for 4 years there, and then 2 years after that, before going to night school, because there was very good support mechanism in place for education. I couldn't get out of school quick enough, left after 4th year, but there was good support to help me move on through the business and into better jobs and better paid jobs. And I think that that's missing today. And for a group that I want to talk about later, we've abandoned them and we need to do something about it. And the growth is absolutely key. We talk about inclusive growth, but very often the dialogue is about sharing what we've got. We need to create a lot more wealth in Scotland to be able to share more and to do more for everyone, to get equality for everyone. We have to nurture growth and encourage it in private businesses in Scotland, because that's what creates the jobs, the highly paid jobs. And there's a lot of low paid work just now. We talk about the living wage. A lot of the skills that are required in Scotland just now pay much better than the living wage. But we are not preparing a group of our people, of young people, to enable them to take part in that economic opportunity. We need to see the private sector and encouraging business and growth as our friend and not demonise it. And I think there's a tendency sometimes for that to be seen as bad, and a focus on sharing what we've got just now. There's no benefit in sharing poverty. We need to create more wealth so that we can improve people's lot. Business is our friend, and you need to encourage the government to support it. We can and should be supporting our businesses to grow locally and internationally, to realise the full economic potential we have here in Scotland. And we have great opportunities. I served my apprenticeship in a company called Weir Pumps. I was very fortunate in 2007 to be able to buy that back. It was going to be closed down, and that riled me when I read about it in the press. Here was another good manufacturing, engineering business that could produce apprenticeships and jobs going to disappear. A foreign company was going to take it over. They were going to pay off 550 people and close the factory down. And the land had been sold to build houses. I think that's been a big problem in the UK in the past. We focus on house building, property and financial services, and we're neglecting to a large extent a lot of the industries that can create the skills that would employ our young people, give good futures to them and pay them a good wage. Now that business, I was able to buy it. It was 550 people when I bought it in 2007. I bought the property back from Cala Homes, or I stopped it being sold to Cala Homes and bought it. And I sold the business in 2011, and it had 960 people employed when I sold it. We had a lot of people earning well above the living wage, and we created a lot of apprenticeships. So it can be done in Scotland, and I think you can grow good businesses in Scotland. But I'm fortunate in that I've built a lot of businesses outside Scotland, created a lot of wealth in these businesses, and I'm able to bring that back in and invest it in Scotland. Many of the small businesses can't do that. They need financial help, they need support, and they need support in other ways from the government to focus on manufacturing. And I was glad to see that the First Minister announced a focus on manufacturing to create these jobs. You know, another business that we bought was shipyard in the Clyde. Now, the Clyde used to have 40 shipyards and produce over 50% of the world's tonnage in ships. Lots of fantastic skills, good jobs, and you know, every year since I suppose the late 50s, early 60s, that's deteriorated. Just over a year ago, the last commercial shipyard in the Clyde was in administration, had paid off its 70 workers, and the administrator had kept 5. Now that was Ferguson's Shipbuilders. Now why has this all declined? You know, we get into this herd instinct that some people say, oh, we can't be competitive anymore. Shipbuilding's dying. It's stupid trying to compete with the Koreans and the Chinese. Absolute nonsense. There's a huge industry in shipbuilding, a huge opportunity. If you look at what happened in the North Sea, as the shipbuilding industry was dying in Glasgow, the North Sea is building up. Huge number of boats being built, service boats and all sorts for the North Sea. Were they built in any of the yards here? No. Business didn't adapt. They weren't supported in the right way. And I don't mean government throwing subsidies. That's the wrong way to do it. It's ways to encourage growth, help companies to grow, and support them to create jobs. Now, we really need to, from my perspective, the key to economic success and prosperity for all is a strong and competitive business base in Scotland. Now, we need to create prosperity to be able to share it. I've been involved in, since 2002, I chaired a group in Glasgow called Welfare to Work, and that was looking at the number of people in welfare in Glasgow to try and help support them, give them the skills to move into work. And there's, you know, it's a big problem in Glasgow. We don't have the right jobs, or we've not got people with the skills to match the jobs that are there. There are plenty of jobs there, but we don't have people properly skilled for it. And I think that's a flaw in the education system, and I'll go on and talk about that. I felt it very frustrating. I've been working there for over 12 years trying to do this. And you know, it's a huge inefficiency we have in the money that we put into trying to skill people to get them off welfare and into work. Huge amounts of wasted money. You don't need any more money in this. You just need to be smarter about how you do it. You know, for example, the last big programme we had is we identified 20,000 people in Glasgow who were keen to get into work. These people wanted to work, were motivated. We identified the skills that they needed and put them into training. At the end of this whole process, we got 3,000 into work. But I wanted to focus on the 17,000 that we didn't get into work. These were people that were willing. So what did we do? We failed them. But what do we do as a system here? We ignore that and we go on and we create the new buzzword for the next big thing that we're going to do to help people in, and we go out and we try and identify them again. Big issue about sharing information. You know, you've got Job Centre Plus, who knows all these people, and you've got the skills development in Scotland. Job Centre Plus is a reserved initiative. Skills development is devolved. You're not allowed to share information. So to find out who needs the help, we have to go out and canvass around supermarkets, pubs, say, are you in benefits? Would you like to work? Instead of just going down the road, getting the information and going and trying to help them. My view, we should have been capturing information from the 17,000 that we didn't get into work and say, what can we do to help you, to get you into work? What went wrong? So there's a big waste there. And it still frustrates me today. Now, as part of that exercise, I focused on how do we stop people drifting onto welfare, coming out of school and just going on to a wasted future. And the numbers shocked me of young people that were coming out and just standing about street corners and not getting the right help. And I've been involved in a number of groups, the Smith group that were looking at it. What can we do to address this issue of NEETs, those kids that are not in employment, education or training? That's where I would be today if I didn't have the infrastructure when I left school. So I feel quite strongly about it, and I don't think we're doing enough for it. So I started looking, I got frustrated trying to change the system, so I started looking at what could I do to show what needs to be done. And beside the factory in Cathcart, we had a building that used to be the apprentice training department. It's where I served my apprenticeship. And it was empty, so I converted that into a school. And I interviewed, or I had a focused dinner with all of the head teachers in Glasgow. This is over 6-7 years ago, to find out what is it we could do? Is there something we could do? What are the characteristics of these young people that are being wasted, we're not supporting? And it came out, a common theme was that at 14, a teacher can tell who's not going to get any qualifications or who's just going to drift into, welfare and have a poor future. So they switch off at 14, mainly boys, but some girls as well. And that might be, when their voices are breaking or they're changing and they're feeling a bit more macho, and it looks better to be, tough rather than dumb in class. So there's a change in behaviour. But a lot of them stop attending. So we've started a school for 14 to 16-year-olds. And this picks them up at S3 and does S3 and S4. And I think these young people, they've disengaged with education, and it's not suitable for everyone, the academic style that we have in Scottish education. It does a great job for probably 80-90% of young people, but it fails the remainder. Now, I called this Newlands Junior College. I called it a junior college because I didn't want it to have the stigma of a special school. And what we do there is we give them maths, English, physics and IT, but they have a choice of 3 vocational subjects from 9. We give them a choice of 9 and they pick 3, and we take them 3 half days a week to City of Glasgow College, who give them instruction on these vocational courses. And those vocational courses are designed so that after 2 years they can automatically go into a national certificate of their choice. We also give them a third leg. We've got a group called Skillforce helping us, and that's life skills we give them. We do outward bound, we take them out to museums, and just general life skills that have perhaps been missing in their family life early on. You wouldn't believe the change in these young people. We pick them up in the morning, draw them from 10 schools around Glasgow in our catchment area, and we take 30 each year. I think that's the right number because they have to get more personal attention. We pick them up in the morning and we give them breakfast and we give them lunch. The environment, and I would invite any of you to come along and see it. You can walk in and just ask to see it. It's amazing the change in these young people, the confidence. Now, when I look at them and I look at the statistics, in Glasgow, over 500 young people a year leave at the statutory leaving age, which is 40 year. Now, about 2/3 of them go on, just over 2/3, go on to what is termed a positive destination. And that's an area that I would look at because we all accept, oh, well, that's a positive destination, that's good. It's nonsense. That's not a positive destination. It could be a 4-week course. It could be a 2-week course, and then after that, they're left. But I didn't, it's too big an issue for me to focus on that, but I think we do need to focus on that group and how do we use our investment and our resources better to get the ones that do go into courses, because at least they've been motivated to go into a course. I focused on the 141 that left school and didn't even go into a week's course or even a 2-day course. 141 that leave, and these are the people that are trapped at the bottom. And that's the people that I draw in to come from the school. These people they've maybe not been attending school, and they're not showing up for anything. And there's 141. Just going to drift on to welfare, maybe get into the criminal justice system, and they're not engaging, and we're not engaging with them, and we're letting them down. Now these people, I've set up this school to try and prove the model. I've had approaches from other local authorities. I've had approaches from other companies in Dundee, DC Thompson are keen to do one up there. I think there's a need for this across Scotland, and it's not something that's too big an issue to take on. It's something we must take on. We would be failing these young people. Now in Scotland, we have this index called the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, and that's categorised by postcode. Now, if I look at the kids in our college, they're all from the bottom decile of this Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. And we hear politicians talking about addressing poverty. They're not addressing it. These people have been left for years, ignored. And I'll give you a wee example that I gave to the First Minister. And I'm intentionally exaggerating it a bit. It's not exaggerating, but I'm using names to get the message across. If I look at wee Tommy from Tory Glen in my college, the government, or the state, if you like, because you've got to look at the city council as well, the state invests 4 years of education in wee Tommy, and 2 of them are probably wasted. And if you look at what the Glasgow City Council say it costs them per pupil per year, that's 6,500 a year. So the state invests 26,000 a year in wee Tommy from Tory Glen, and half of it's wasted. If we then look at Nigel from Newton Mearns, Nigel from Newton Mearns gets invested in him 6 years at secondary school, because Nigel's had a more positive input early on in his life. So he's there for 6 years. He then goes to university for 4 years. The state invests in him £75,000. They invest in wee Tommy, 26. And when I talk about what I'm doing, quite often the answer from politicians and councillors is, we can't afford it, it's too expensive. Now it costs me £12,500 a year per pupil. I don't get the £6,500 from the state to support them. I should, but I don't. But if for another £6,000 for 2 years, another £12,000 invested in wee Tommy, he'll get into a positive destination. he'll get into a good paid apprenticeship, because what I've got in the college is I've got local employers to buy in to sponsor them. Last week we took the whole class to W.H. Malcolm's, and Andrew and Walter Malcolm put on a great show of all the jobs that they could offer. Great number of jobs, and showing them around, explaining to them what they do. And that's what we do with a lot of the employers that engage with us. So we're tying up these young people with jobs that are available. And we're talking to them for 2 years when they're with us about work. We're also taking them to college 3.5 days a week. So they're getting used to a college environment that these young people would not believe. That's way above them. It's out with their reach. They wouldn't go there if they left school with nothing. You know, now they've got a pathway into college. One of our young people has left. We're only in the second year of the school operating, so this summer they all go out into a job or college. But one left at Christmas because he was 16 and he went to college. The college said they could put him into the vocational course that he wanted because he had made so much progress. So, you know, the relationship with jobs that are available locally, with the companies engaging, and every company I've talked to is very supportive of these young people. They understand the issues that they have. Some of the stories about the backgrounds to them, I wouldn't say, you know, I couldn't tell you about, and I want to keep it positive. I don't want to talk about it being deprived or whatever, but we've got to keep it positive. That's why I call it a junior college. Sometimes when it's reported in the press, they use unfortunate language to describe this group. These are talented young people that just need engaged with properly. If we invested half as much in wee Tommy as we did in Nigel, we would have a great future for Tommy, and we could change his life. And that's what we're doing, but we need to do more. This is a group that across the whole of Scotland are trapped and are going to be trapped in poverty unless we address it. And we can address it for a very low cost. I mean, this is nothing. This is nothing. And we shouldn't talk about attainment being the number of hires you get to A grade or however it's graded now. That's not attainment. And going to university is not attainment. Attainment is being able to get into a good job, a stable job that can provide you with a good future and well above the living wage. And there's lots of them out there. And I think we really need to be doing more about it. That's where we should be starting with this move to be inclusive in the growth of companies. And we shouldn't miss the point, and don't be misled by soundbite politicians that demonize business. Most businesses that I know are very supportive of the young people and the equality agenda. So happy to answer questions later on, but that's probably taken more than my 15 minutes allocated, but thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Jim. I mean, I think obviously some of the key points here, I think in terms of, certainly we see at SCVO in terms of Community Jobs Scotland programme, is around public sector agencies working together, sharing information. And what you were saying about SDS definitely resonates, but I think it is about where do we invest for the future. And that's actually going to be important given Scottish Government's financial position, or the public sector's financial position over the next few years. It will be important that we do invest, whether it's in young people, or the right areas to boost the economy, or the right areas in terms of the Fair Work agenda. Our next speaker is Henry Simmons, who's Chief Exec of Alzheimer's Scotland. Henry's been Chief Exec since August 2008. Over 20 years experience in the health and social care sector, and spent the majority of that in the voluntary sector. And he's worked both in learning disability. He was previously an executive director at Enable and in the mental health fields. Importantly at the moment, Henry is the third sector representative on the Fair Work Convention, which is going to be responsible for taking a key part of this agenda forward. So we're going to hear from Henry on that, and then we'll open it up to questions. Henry.
Well, good morning, colleagues. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you today. And I'm sure that many people in the room, when you're approached by John Downey to get involved with something, the first thing is quite a deep breath and just patiently waiting to what he's going to ask you to get involved with. So when he phoned me up and said, you're going to get a call in a little while about becoming part of a thing called the Fair Work Convention, I was a little bit surprised and uncertain. I've been so immersed in dementia policy for the past like 7 or 8 years that to shift my paradigm a little was a challenge. However, having considered it and looked at it, I felt it was a real honour, if not a bit of a poison chalice, to try and represent the third sector in any national forum, but I gladly accepted that. And I really would want to pay credit to John and to SCVO for their ongoing and deeply committed efforts to ensure that our sector is represented and engaged in the highest level of discussion in Scotland about how we can transform our society and ensure that through a belief in inclusive growth and indeed fair work practice, Scotland can prosper, grow and become a more equal and fairer society. I have to tell you, I deeply believe, and I'm extremely pleased that the core philosophy of Scotland's economic strategy is that we can only become more productive if we become fairer. This is absolutely the right strategy, and it's one that we as a sector have a lot to offer, given that we are constituted by some 45,000 voluntary organisations, responsible for £4.5 billion worth of the Scottish economy, and employing over 138,000 people. So it's clear that our role is central and it's crucial that we are viable and we are part of a confident contributor to this movement. So can fair work play a key role in delivering inclusive growth? Absolutely. My view is that inclusive growth challenges the belief that inequality is necessary for any thriving economy, turning it on its head and arguing that equality, inclusion and fairness should be the key drivers. And colleagues, I'd like just to take some time to try and explain to you what I think the construct of fair work looks like and give you some indication as to what the Convention's report will probably consist of when it's released within the next few weeks. Obviously, I can't get into the full detail of that because the report is coming, but what I can say is that right at the start of this process, the Convention members were very clear not to attempt to define fair work too quickly. But we tried to set out an initial framework of understanding, really based on what research and best practice and a lot of evidence that's out there, not just in the UK, but across Europe and beyond. And really what this tells you is that fair work appears to have five fundamental main components. And we use these components as the basis for quite an extensive consultation process and engagement. And throughout that process, no one, not a single person, disagreed with any of these 5 elements, these 5 components. So I can confidently predict that the Fair Work framework will have at its core 5 key elements, and a central belief that work that's fair is work that offers individuals opportunity, security, fulfilment, respect and effective voice. Fair work balances the rights and the responsibilities of employers and employees so that it can generate benefits for individuals, for the organisations and indeed for broader society. But colleagues, what I would say, and it's very important to say, is that the Fair Work framework is definitely only a starting point. It's the beginning of a journey towards a fairer work, and a journey that I'm sure will reap rewards for many people who want to be involved in work and who are encouraged to be in work. And it will, in my opinion, help support inclusive growth and ultimately a more prosperous and progressive Scotland. The vision of the Fair Work Convention will be something like, well, I didn't tell you this, but it will be something like by 2025, people in Scotland will have a world-leading working life where fair work drives success, well-being and prosperity for all individuals, businesses, organisations and for society. I'd just like to take a moment to touch base on the 5 themes and just describe to you what we mean by opportunity to begin with. Opportunity means that we must ensure that people have access to work and the ability to progress within work. It's a crucial dimension of the Fair Work agenda, and simply meeting legal obligations based on the equality legislation is only a first step towards that. What we want to ensure is that fair opportunity is much more than that. It's about attitudes, behaviours, policies, practices within organisations that produce outcomes and can signal and reflect good practice based on fair opportunity. We want to encourage a culture shift where people are more proactive in ensuring opportunity for all, highlighting good practice, signalling areas of change, and eventually producing a good range of opportunities that will deliver benefits for individuals. I can't tell you how inspiring it was to hear Jim talk, because one of the key things that I felt throughout this year is that employers need to do much more to reach beyond their organisational gates and extend the responsibility into the hearts of the communities which they operate and try and create more opportunity. We've not heard a better example than you heard this morning. But colleagues, I think this is a reciprocal process. Employers benefit much from the communities within which they operate. They can do much more to create more innovation, better engagement within that community, and particularly around some of the more disadvantaged groups and people within our communities who can offer much to many of our organisations. As we went through the consultation last year, it was clear to me that many of the young people we met, and particularly those who were described as having difficulties or labelled as having difficulties with their mental health, received very little opportunity. The work of Community Jobs Scotland for many young people was central in turning that around, and there are good examples. But the overwhelming feeling that came across and was very clear to me was that so many young people just do not know how the world's changed, what opportunities exist and what they want to do. And we heard time and time again that, well, I know I want to either work in an office or work in a factory or outside. That was the extent, depth of understanding about the opportunities. And colleagues, in terms of security, I think we all agree that it's a fundamental platform for a good quality of life and fair work. And colleagues, I think that the living wage and the aspiration of the living wage is a crucial component to accepting that within our country and society. We have to believe that we don't want any one person so disadvantaged to the point that they don't have enough money to enjoy a social outing with their family at the weekend, or to put a healthy, well-balanced meal on their table through the week. This is not a lot to aspire to. And alongside the other elements of the security element of the framework, we must make sure that we do all we can to achieve this. Now, no one can guarantee absolute security, but for far too many people, the risk falls on the individual worker. We've seen this in zero-hour contracts. We've seen this in the very part-time and extremely flexible nature of our workforces. And some people, for example, in the care sector, retail sectors, work between 2 or 3 employers simply to make enough for a decent wage. And the consequence of that is not only the cost to the person, but it damages that individual's commitment, it disconnects the workers from the organisation, and there's no real sense of organisational connectivity or peer connectivity. And colleagues, that all flows into the fulfilment concept and the concepts around fulfilment that we've been exploring. And I think this is something which is significantly and crucially important to the social care elements of the third sector. We've moved away from having a workforce where people used to be able to make choices about working with individuals to deliver outcomes, making choices about the time that they spent to do that, making choices about how best to use their time with that individual, to a workforce that is now so disempowered that they're really only provided with timetables and allocated slots as to when to go and see someone. They're not allowed to make a decision about spending more than the allotted time with that individual, and we forget all about individual outcomes in this rush to create a timetabled, slot-based approach to care. And as a result of this, quite literally, hundreds of thousands of workers have no ability to make any decisions within their work, and we've diminished their fulfilment, their experience, and their quality of that role. Yet, we ask them to work with some of the most vulnerable people within our society. We regulate them, we pay them very little in some cases, but we expect so much from them. So I hope that this framework will provide us with a platform to continue to challenge and change this as we move forward. And I've certainly argued within the Convention that one of the priority areas that we must take forward next year is the current commissioning practices and approaches and the social care workforce in general. Colleagues, at an individual level, the respect theme is probably one that does not need much explanation, but delivering it seems very challenging. So many people are working in environments that do not appear to respect basic rights and don't treat people with real dignity. And I believe that this is added to by an almost institutional form of discrimination. How often have you heard people describe things like, oh, you'll end up with just a job in retail, or in a call centre, or in the care sector? And my argument is that working in a lower paid form of employment does not equate to lesser employment. And we must make sure that we value the importance of these roles and ensure that fair work practices really protect the individuals within that, but collectively we start to take away this stigma that's being shrouded and cloaked many of these workers in. My view is many of these roles will form the backbone of inclusive growth. So we need to do more to make them better, make them more fulfilling, and indeed more secure. And colleagues, I genuinely believe that we must do this by ensuring that these individuals and our workforces in general have a greater and more effective voice. There's no doubt that where there are effective mechanisms for engagement and bargaining, workers enjoy better terms and conditions, and organisations can definitely prosper. And I think this is an area where we as a sector have quite a mixed bag. Some of us are very well organised, indeed have the ability to deliver a very strong, effective voice for our staff. Others have nothing at all. And I think the role of trade unions as a partner within our sector is definitely very, very mixed, and times very confused in both parts of that. And I think it's my very considered position that we need to do more to establish better relationships with our colleagues who are in the trade union sector and with our workers, and we need to establish better practices in terms of our engagement with staff, particularly those who are very, very remote and very distant from central bases. And again, I would use social care as a case in point. We really need to understand, and all the national agencies need to understand, that this workforce does no longer operate in one single site. It is dispersed across our communities. People work from home, they don't travel into offices, they're very isolated, they're not connected, and we need to find methods of ensuring that their voice within organisations is better protected. Because from my perspective, this is an area that, as we've entered into this very large-scale, short-term funding, framework-based commissioning, we've lost that. Many of our organisations, colleagues, have a deep desire to deliver on their mission, and we believe in it, and we want to make sure it's there. But we've also got to remember that at times there's a cost to employees within that, and we must consider this. And I suspect that many organisations, when they explore that question deeply enough, will conclude that unless the current commission arrangements, the short-term funding nature of much of our work dramatically changes, the lack of ability to deliver fair work practice puts that mission at risk rather than enhancing it. Colleagues, finally, I think that we as a society in Scotland have a fundamental question to ask ourselves about what we think fair work means as consumers as much as employers or employees. I'll give you a good example. do we expect too much? Do we expect it too often? Do we expect it too quickly? If you think about like the way that people's reactions to like getting something ordered online these days, people expect that to be delivered that day or the next day, with no thought given to the person that has to pack that, has to deliver it, has to take it through the chain. Some of our expectations as consumers are driving potentially very unfair work practices, and we've got to make decisions about what we want for our businesses in Scotland, and we've got to develop a sense of reasonableness. A platform of reasonableness is really crucial if we want to encourage proper fairness in work, and we have to make sure that we, as consumers, make decisions about supporting organisations that can actually demonstrate fair work practices. So in conclusion, colleagues, I put it to you that fair work is a key component to inclusive growth, that they must go hand in hand. I believe firmly we can increase growth and productivity through increasing fairness, but we are truly only at the start of that journey, and I hope that the Fair Work framework will provide a good compass to navigate our way towards this. Many, many thanks.
Collins, I think we've heard two really insightful and interesting perspectives on where we're going with this agenda. But I think at the heart of it is attitudes, behaviours, both of employers and employees, and obviously people coming up. And certainly, how do we then change that culture to change? Actually, how do we get employers in every sector, public sector, third sector, and private sector, to do more, to engage young people at an early age, to actually create conditions where, I think as Henry said, people have much more control over their working lives in some senses. And I think that's one of the things that's certainly the heart of a lot of our arguments in terms of a whole range of things, and particularly in employability and expansion of the self-directedness agenda, giving people much more of a choice of how they do things. And actually, how do we do that and make sure that organisations are still at the heart of their community? We're going to maybe open it up to questions, and Jim and Henry have been joined by Stuart Patrick, who's the Chief Executive of Glasgow Chamber of Commerce. I mean, Stuart's with a long career in economic development, and the Chamber has been at the heart in terms of the revival in Glasgow in the last 10 to 12 years, and actually trying to create jobs, and they have their own employability agenda with employers in the city. And I think that's where we need to open up this debate. How do we see it going? So if anybody's got a question.
Just come.
Bring this microphone down front. Jenny, could you? If anybody's got a question, we'll start with that. Sit closer. Take Alan at the back there.
Yep. Hi, Alan Staff, Apex Scotland. Comments really on Jim's presentation. Jim, thank you. Inspirational. I really hope that things carry on moving. We work, Apex work in 10 schools with disadvantaged and excluded young people, and the object is to try and get them back into mainstream education. A huge percentage of those would really benefit from the sort of thing that you're talking about. Our problem is that we work to get people back into mainstream education, which is a good thing, but a lot of them then go into a system where only the academic achievement is valued. Therefore, there's no mentoring, there is no inspiration. So we see a whole group of people who just have this complete poverty of aspiration, whereby a job is just a job, it's a commodity, it's something you have to have, but there is no sense of ownership of that, there is no sense of ambition in that. And you don't have the people in the school who are actually capable of inspiring into that area. They are, by and large, academics themselves. The only thing they can inspire is academic achievement. I've worked a lot in Europe, and in Europe, the state schools have a much greater relationship with employers, particularly the large employers. They're there, they're visible in the schools, they're providing business mentors, they actually provide education classes and so forth within the schools. And I'm wondering if you've got any comments about the relationship between the public sector and the private sector. Do we need to address that? Is there something we can do about it?
No, just come on.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I think you're absolutely right. And, you know, I've been thinking about where the systems failed and why was I able to do what I was able to do. Now, when I went to the different colleges in Glasgow, I've been to every college, you know, Langside College, Stoke College, College of Technology before it was the university. I've been to 3 of the universities. So I've been through the education system. But early on, in the City and Guilds courses that I did, the Ordinary National, it tended to be lecturers who had come from industry. They didn't all have a degree. Some had HNCs, but they had this connection with the world of work. And I think that's missing in teachers just now in the schools. Employers want to engage, but they don't know how to engage with the public sector. And to be honest, the public sector and schools say they want to engage with employers, but it's difficult. I've tried hard to engage and I've achieved some success engaging with the public sector, but there were many times where I thought, you know, I should give up because there's a kind of ring fence put around it. Look, you're not coming into my territory, you know, to tell me what to do, and that's not what we're trying to do. I just think there's a missing link there, and we do spend a lot of money trying to get people back into the mainstream education, and I think that's wrong. For a small number, it's maybe the right thing to do, but what we need to do is create an alternative path which engages in a way that suits the young people that are disengaging. They're disengaging for a reason, and we need to find a way to engage with them. Now, what we do at the college is we give them respect. I asked a couple of the students independently, about a month after they had joined, what's the big difference between the school you were at and here? What's the biggest difference? And 3 of them independently said, you care about us here. So they felt they were just, because they were not academically successful, they were sidelined. And you're right, we see success as being hires, a number of hires going to university. We target 50% of people going to university. We actually send people to university that are missing out now on this skills input, and when I say education, a broader education in life. You know, when I went into my apprenticeship, the journeyman I'm working with disciplined me. You know, there was a lot of learning in there that's nothing to do with academic learning. It's learning how to interact with people, deal with difficult people. You know, there's a whole broad education here that's missing, and I feel that we need to create another way, and to keep trying to push people into a system that they're not suited for is a waste of money. We could save money by mainstreaming the kind of initiative that we've got going, and I'm determined that we're going to get there with that.
Jim, I'm going to ask Stuart for a perspective on it. Stuart, I think particularly in terms of the employer base for actually engaging in this agenda. I mean, SCVO, our consortium of Community Jobs Scotland's got nearly 600 organisations. You've got a very strong membership base. Do they still find it hard to engage in this agenda and bring more young people in through either, is it the system, links with schools, links with public sector agencies like SDS?
Well, I suppose the first thing I would say is that the enthusiasm for employers to get involved with schools, is, as Jim says, is there. It is clearly there. One of the frustrations I think that comes, as Jim said, about the how do you access the system. There is a tendency in the public sector to reinvent things over cycles. We've been through doing education business partnerships several times over the last 20, 25 years. We're going through another phase right now, which looks quite positive, through the developing the young workforce agenda that's come out from the Scottish Government. And we've actively engaged with that. We've set up our own system for engaging with the local schools in Glasgow. We've no shortage of employers who want to get involved in the schools and are signing agreements with individual secondary schools at the moment to work with the school. However, the challenge remains that the system for education makes it really rather difficult for the head teachers and the teachers to really exploit the opportunity that they're given, not through their fault. They're having to work to a set of targets, a set of outcomes, a set of systems, procedures that make it really tricky to get that relationship to work. But we're trying hard. We will continue to build the enthusiasm amongst the employer base to bring schools and businesses closer together in the way that Jim described. There's one tiny little additional comment I'd make, which is, in the same way that Jim is saying, please don't demonize business, I'd equally be concerned that we don't demonize university education either. You still get, if you go to university, you will still get a very good return on your investment. In Scotland, you invest less than you might do if you were a Chinese student coming to Scotland to university here. But the Chinese come in droves because they know they're going to get a very, very good return on their investment. In the world, global labour market, a university education is still a very, very good thing to get involved in. So we shouldn't get into a battle over, it's a bad idea to send too many kids to university. The real issue is the kids who don't get any opportunities at all. And Jim has given a wonderful explanation of how simple it should be to make an investment decision behind the kids that get no opportunity whatsoever at the moment.
Thanks, sure. Although I think I would question how much return on investment Scotland gets for its investment in our higher education system in terms of the money they get. I think there's still something there in return on investment. There's a gentleman in the back there has a question.
Yeah, John. Frank Roy, I'm the campaign director of Scotland Stronger in Europe campaign, the campaign for the European referendum. That's not actually the point I want to make this morning. In a former life, I'd locally in my own area, I'd spoken to an awful lot of small businesses and young people who didn't have a job. And I think the first thing to realise with many people, as I realise with young people, is that you need to aspire them, they need to have aspiration, and they need to have self-esteem. And that's, to me, that's the number one component about, you know, bringing young people on in life, that they need to have a self-esteem opens so many doors. And I don't know how many young people I spoke to and said, look, I can't get a job because I've no experience. And they say, well, I can't get experience because I've no job, so how do you break that cycle? And I went to an awful lot of local employers in my town and the DWP, and I said, how are we going to break this cycle? And what we've done is we set up a kind of organisation called Our Community, and it was very successful. We signed up 60 businesses. Today, 42 young people have got full-time jobs because of it. But I had to break down lots of barriers and doors with the DWP and with those small and medium enterprises to let people come in the door. And one of the things that worried me was when I went to the employers was that if they put a job advert in the paper, they get 300 applications and they couldn't handle it, and therefore they needed help. So what I want to do is to the panel, how do you think those small businesses and the charities and the colleges and the DWP can get down to take some of these barriers down and to use their discretion? Because 9 times out of 10, if people use their discretion, you can get that door open. We were able to open the door, but you know, I'm really interested to find
Jim,
out what the panel's views are.
Start with yourself and then go on to Henry on that one. How do we break down those connections and those barriers? And
well, you know, one of the triggers that caused me to do what I'm doing with this college was, you know, when I took over the Weir Pumps business, I had employees in there contacting me and saying, I tried to get my son in. My father worked in this business, tried to get my son into an apprenticeship, and the apprentice training department, the HR, have refused. You know, he doesn't come up to scratch. And it was because the young person, when I spoke to them, say, look, could you not make an exception? This guy's worked in here all his life. His father worked. We need to be supporting these people. They said, look, Jim, we wouldn't be doing him any favours because he's going to fail because he's not prepared well enough to come in, to make that step in. And I think the real focus is in preparing them. That's why I'm focusing on these 2 years before they come in. Just simple things that are missing from these young people, like it's all about self-esteem. They don't have it because it's been kind of drummed out of them, and that's the biggest thing we give them. We give them respect. We don't have a bell that starts classes. We gave them all iPads. Not one has gone missing. You would expect them to sell them or whatever. Not one. So I think that it's in the preparation, it's in the education of them to prepare them. There's plenty of opportunity there. Small businesses have got a challenge because they're small. They don't have the additional resources to spend the extra time with these young people that they need. And they need the input that's been lacking in their earlier life. They need to be brought up to speed to realise that they're talented people. We just need to find their talent, and support them. And I think that's where we're failing. We need to come up with a way to pick up those people that are left out of the system, that are getting a third less than the successful kids. And I didn't mean to demonise university, but I don't think we should be doing it to the exclusion of the people at the other end and thinking that, by investing 3 times as much in people to get them to university and through is the answer. For the Scottish education system, I think on the whole is very good. And some of the changes that have happened with the Wood report that came out, where you can now in 4th, 5th and 6th year choose vocational subjects as well as academic ones, that's a major breakthrough. But it's a major breakthrough for the 80% or the 85% that are suited to academic education. That's going to prepare those young people that take the vocational courses, prepare them better for the jobs they go into. And I think we need to create more high quality jobs in Scotland. There's loads of low paid jobs that you talked about earlier. And I think that's part of learning. I've had lots of jobs when I was younger that were poorly paid, but it gave me lots of experience. It was training. So we shouldn't demonise some of these jobs and try and, by forcing people to pay a minimum amount, there's a fine balance here. But if you go all the way and say you have to pay this young person that amount of money, they won't do it because they can't afford it. What we need are better paid jobs. And if I go back to the shipyard that we bought over a year ago, there were 5 people employed there in Port Glasgow when we took it over. It's just over a year, and we now have 220 people employed, and we're going to have to take it up to 400, and all are well above the living wage, and we'll be providing 150 apprenticeships over the next 5 years. Now, and when we took everybody back that had been made redundant, we gave them a 5% pay rise. And if you don't mind, I'll just sort of reinforce what you were saying about the value of paying fairly. Earlier on, when we took over the Weir Group, I get asked several times, when are you going to look at our wages? And I thought I was doing a good job of saving their jobs. Now, after the 3rd time I said I would look at it, and when I looked at it, the top skilled people were being paid 17.5% less. 17.5% less than their equivalent people in other jobs. I told the MD at the time, you need to increase their pay. He said, Jim, we can do it over 3 years. We don't need to do it all at once. I said, you need to do it now. They should be claiming it backdated because you've been underpaying them. He then came back to me after that and said, look, you'll need to change my bonus arrangements because you've now upped my costs. You need to change the targets for me making my bonus. And I said, I'm not doing that. He left because we didn't see eye to eye. After that first year, we beat our budget. We beat our budget by a good way because we gave the people their pay rise and they were treated fairly. Now, accountants don't see that. They just see that as an increased cost. But they didn't have faith in the human spirit, which they should have. When people are treated fairly, you get better output and you create more value. And the same thing happened in the shipyard. We gave them a 5% increase coming back because other people were getting that sort of level of pay. The first ship we built was built, and we planned the hours out for it based on previous ships that they had built the same way. We finished it 6 months early. We saved a fortune in costs there because we treated people fairly and we paid them fairly. So it reinforces what you were saying earlier. Now, many employers don't see that. They see it as a cost. They don't see it as, they don't see the benefit that comes through.
Henry, that's I suppose that's, I mean, that point at the end, the fair wage, the fair conditions agenda, I mean, social care is a big tricky issue in terms of that agenda. It's going to, you know, the First Minister's announcement, they want the living wage for all social care workers, bring it in October, which is great because it's going to take 50,000 people, you know, more paying the living wage, but actually it's going to be difficult to implement because I think the Scottish Government's sums don't add up at the moment, as we're all aware in terms of doing that. So how do you address some of those tricky issues that Jim's talking about to give people, you know, fair pay, fair work at the same time in an environment where a lot of organisations have got local authority contracts?
Yeah, I mean, I think just if I can go back to Frankie's point first of all, because I think that's a really important example of what can happen within local communities, and I think the at the present time, I certainly think there's a door open in Scotland to really influence this agenda in a much more strategic way, and I think that the Fair Work framework can give us a real blueprint for that can capture some of the local and very good examples and start to share that at a much more strategic level. I mean, I think it's good that we've now got a ministerial position for Fair Work. We've got a directorate of Fair Work in Scottish Government. They're still trying to figure out how they fit in to the rest of Scottish Government, but it's a good sign. I think that if we can get a strategy through the Fair Work agenda and the framework to then encourage people to move forward through sharing and learning from each other, then I see some hope. But I do think it needs that national strategic buy-in, it needs real political commitment, it needs local political commitment. And we need to move beyond this general understanding of I think that we've got equality and equal sort of like, you know, employment law legislation, and people think by doing that means they're behaving fairly. And I think the two things don't always sit in the same camp. And I think, like, fairness sometimes is about being a little bit different. And, you know, a lot of young people that maybe have had a mental health problem or have had some conviction, or women that have been victims of domestic violence, they need some adaptation beyond the legislation. They need something that equates more to fairness and to opportunity. And that, I think you used the sort of description as flexibility in using your initiative. To me, that needs to then be couched in a framework that gives everybody a bit of protection and a bit of understanding that we can behave in this way. And I think the Fair Work framework should deliver that as a starting point. I go back to the bit about, I mean, I think that this issue of employers, local authorities and everyone maybe not quite welding together as much as we want. Again, I see this framework as being an opportunity for everyone to just move beyond that and get into the one room and think about how we can deliver that. And I don't think the framework needs to come out in any legislative form, tick box form, but it's something that is a statement about we as a collective community in Scotland, where we want to go, with some evidence about how and why we should go there. And I think the overwhelming evidence that I've seen is that by increasing fairness, you will increase productivity. Now, for our sector, John, productivity is not a great word, because in the social care element of that, but if you translate productivity with commitment, extra dedication, you know, extra citizenship behaviour, and you start to see people being treated more fairly, you'll see huge reductions in things like absence, turnover, you know, really much more productive engagement within the organisation. I think the living wage part of that, and the current discussions about living wage, is that, you know, when you talk to staff, they don't immediately say, and Oxfam's recent report tells you that It's not about some of the other things that are important to them, like the opportunity and the fulfilment. It's about security and about knowing that they've got enough money to live on. And I think that the problem we've got in the social care sector is that we've really created this. The sector's got far too many really very part-time, really dispersed, really disconnected people. And a sort of like, you know, a 20 pence or 30 pence increase to living wage isn't going to fundamentally change the nature of that person's work experience or employment. And we need to say, right, okay, great, thanks, we'll take that living wage and we'll get it implemented. But the problem will be next year when Loughborough's reference wage will increase, and we'll be looking at another 4% increase to get the living wage maintained, and then the next 3, 4, 5 years it'll be a 20% increase. So just a short one jab in the arm isn't going to solve the difficulty. We've got to go back the way of commissioning and look carefully from that
And the nature of the work. One final quick question. Lucy, you had a point?
Yeah, morning gents. A lot of our discussion this morning is focused on opportunities for young people and opportunities for young men in particular. But I think where Henry was beginning to take us edges towards my question, which is if our conversation is about inclusive growth, if it's about fairness and it's about fulfillment, then we need to have a view about the intrinsic unfairness there is in our economy at the moment for women. And social care is a big theme of this because the vast majority of the social care workforce are women. And as you're beginning to say there, Henry, the problems that there are about career progression, proper reward, fulfillment, flexibility and so on are very much in that field, but also elsewhere as they affect women in the workplace and in terms of careers. It's also a fact that the third sector has more women employed in it than any other sector. And my analysis is that that's because we are more flexible, and where we can, we provide opportunities for women to be employed part-time but still rewarded, to be able to progress in their careers and take on management roles and not stay at entry-level roles. And that clearly pays dividends in terms of allowing people, and particularly women, to progress. I just wondered if the panel had any views on that and whether there's anything that the experience that we have in the third sector could be spread into the private sector to enable women to progress in the private sector and the public sector as well.
Stuart, do you want to pick up on... I'll let Stuart answer that question, and then I'll let Stuart come and make some closing remarks to end the day, unless anybody else... Jim wants to make a point on it as well, that's fine.
Just before I answer that question, can I just... One thing about the living wage, I just wanted to make one remark, particularly around small companies. One of the most telling conversations I had during the living wage, and don't for a minute assume that the discussion of the living wage is a given within employers. It's a very controversial issue for a lot of sectors, especially those with heavy property costs. It's a real challenge for a lot of sectors in retail and catering and so forth. But I had a conversation with a restaurateur who basically said to me, to pick up on one of Henry's points, I'll happily pay the living wage if a consumer will pay £16 for my burgers, because I can't see how else I'm going to do this. My property costs are fixed, my bank loan's fixed, my interest rates and that, I can't control that. My purchase, I'm too wee to negotiate big deals on purchases, so they're basically fixed as well. So exactly where do I find the extra money in order to pay the living wage? And I'm not sure how I could answer that question. It's not an easy debate to have with a small employer. So question, first of all. And I think actually a point about our imposition of issues on small employers is something that we are, to some degree, overlooking in this debate. Large employers, I think, are very capable of handling these issues and making decisions and structuring their model because they can control so much. Small employers can control very little. So in answer to the question that was actually asked, I actually would like to start asking, to what extent are we structuring our whole system to make it easier for those kinds of decisions within employers to work? And I take the point very firmly about social care as an employee within a company. What flexibilities are we giving to employees in order to handle social demands of the family? I get this I'm a small employer. I've got 20 folks that I have in the chamber, and Glasgow offers me a really tricky circumstance because we've got very unhealthy population. So I can say that at least a quarter of the workforce at some stage are having to deal with social care issues. And you're right that it tends to be the women that are doing most of that social care. So why is that? What is it that's causing that? I'd like to understand, what is it within my environment that makes it more likely that I'm getting demands coming to me from the female workforce to look after the family than from the male workforce? That sounds like a cultural issue. I don't think I'm doing anything within the company that makes that happen, but it seems to be one of the most fundamental issues that affects the majority of women who work in my company. So it's a question I don't have an answer to.
Okay, Jim.
I'd just like to pick you up on the first thing, the underlying thinking in a statement you made about this was mainly focused on men or young males. It wasn't. I was talking about everybody. We've got, in the school and in the engineering jobs we've got women that have got equal opportunity. We've got women who want to be welders and they're actually doing apprenticeships just now on it. So there was I don't know where you picked up that this was mainly focused on men, because it wasn't. And in terms of flexibility, I mean, in our organisation, at the sort of highest level of pay, most of our, probably a good number of our employees are female, and we do have flexible working because they're talented individuals that we want to accommodate. But I am also seeing, Stuart, some of the younger, well, when I say younger, it's all relative, but younger males in the organisation are now taking equal responsibility. I've got some young men just married in their 30s, and they're taking their time off to look after the kids because their wife is working as well. So I think society's changing and there's a bit more sharing there, and certainly employers are changing in providing flexibility, because it's talent that people that have started with us, got married, had families, and I don't want to lose that talent. I want to keep them.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to ask Stuart to say a few brief concluding remarks just to sum up the discussion, because I think for us this discussion will continue, as will the debate on how we reshape Scotland's economy. Stuart.
Great. Well, thanks very much, John, and particularly thanks to Jim and to Henry. We've got a couple of very clear statements of what the issues are, and I took a few messages from Jim in particular on the importance of supporting and working with business to create wealth, to grow the cake. If we're going to achieve a fairer society, it's better if we've got a growing cake to spread around than if we don't. Not to demonise the employer, that obviously speaks to my personal agenda as the Chief Executive of Glasgow Chamber of Commerce, but equally to recognise that the majority of employers do actually want to work out solutions to the issues that Henry in particular laid out in the framework for fair work. Particularly picking up on Jim, that it just seems so obviously simple that we should be investing more money in those that are at the very margins, and that we've got problems with designing systems that allow us to deal with those at the margins differently from those who are pushed through the whole system. We've got to ask questions about whether that actually works, both in terms of the social outcomes that we get, the economic outcomes, and whether it's actually cost effective, as Jim gave us the sums that made it seem so obvious that doesn't work at the moment. And he gave us a very good example of how a bit of flexibility through the likes of a Newlands Junior College model could very cost effectively address those who are on the margin. And Henry gave us a very clear statement of the components of what a fair work framework might look like, with the opportunity, security, fulfilment, respect, and an effective voice, and some very challenging issues that for some employers I think we've still got a bit of a journey to go on, particularly around the problems of disempowerment and fulfillment, the creation of a fulfilling job. So many of the low-paid jobs that don't have that level of respect are indeed the ones where there is no flexibility to manoeuvre, and call centres are the one that comes up to, or burger flippers come up regularly as examples of that. And so we do as employers have to ask, how are we designing jobs? But he also made a really fundamental point in my mind. What is it that we as consumers expect of those that are supplying us services? If we expect Amazon to deliver goods a day after we've ordered them, we have to think through the consequences of that, and we're not at the moment. So very, very challenging and thoughtful points from both of our speakers. So it's certainly given me an opportunity to ponder further that balance of negotiation between those who are getting into jobs, those who are not getting into jobs, and those who are providing the jobs. How do we all understand ourselves better, each other better, in order that we can achieve the kind of framework of fair work that Henry has outlined? So I'll finish on that. I shall say thank you very much and invite you to thank our speakers, Jim McColl and Henry, and John for giving his hosting of this morning on behalf of SCVO, and thank you from Glasgow Chamber of Commerce for your interest. Thank you very much indeed.